Dr. Kelly Liebengood is going to come up and tell us a little Greek and just tell us his story, and he can introduce his lovely wife to us as well. Thank you for being here.
Thanks. You want your copy of this?
You bet.
Yeah, that's yours.
No,
All right.
the test is going to be at
Yeah.
12:45. So
I'm in.
Y'all better listen up.
I'm in. I'm in finals mode right now, so I just gave a final on the Book of Revelation like about an hour ago. Anyways, well, it's good to be here. I appreciate the invitation. Ken called me, I don't know, maybe a month ago, and got to know a little bit about this group, and I was really grateful for the opportunity. It's good to be here. Yeah. So my wife Marietta, she loves when she gets called out. So, but grateful for her. So this is a little bit of a trial. So I'm curious to kind of hear and see how it's received. So I'm part of what I do is I'm a biblical scholar. I spend a lot of time researching and writing to other specialists. Most of my written work is to other people like me, which means like 5 people read what I write. And so I'm at the stage in my life now where I'm wanting to transition from that kind of writing into writing for the church. I always viewed my scholarship as for the church and for helping equip the church to do what God has called us to be and do. So this is kind of one of the many books that I'm kind of working on, and so it's kind of like an overview of what I'm going to try to do in the book. So anyways, I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit about that, your feedback on that. I want to give you a little bit of a context for who I am, since many of you don't know me or know me in a very small context. And I think it's important, the things I want to share, because it'll help kind of explain a little bit about what I'm trying to do today. But I am, by the way, trying to one-up Chad. He needed 4 words, okay? I just need 1. And, he needed 2 hours, and I only need like 40 minutes. So, so we'll see how that works. But I did want to share a little bit of my story so that you kind of understand a little bit who's this person talking. So I grew up in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, that is. And my whole life was built around sports, athletics. Both because my father was a famous broadcaster in the San Francisco Bay Area and also worked for ESPN. When it was just coming out, he was the announcer for Stanford football. He was the sports guy that covered the Warriors and the Giants and the A's and the 49ers and the Raiders when they were all winning Super Bowls. So I was around all of that stuff my whole life. That was like my normal everyday life. But also because I love sports. I played just about every sport you could possibly play. I ended up playing college football at the San Jose State University, and was shaped by that experience in ways that I never would have anticipated. And I recall 2 significant moments, the way that God used football to kind of bring me to where I am now. I should say that growing up in the Bay Area, if you know anything about the San Francisco Bay Area, I did not know any Christians. My parents were not Christians. I had 0 background or context for Christianity. I had no idea what Jesus had to do with Christmas or anything else, other than I knew his name as a cuss word when I missed a shot or missed a tackle or whatever. I learned that from lots of people. So I remember my freshman year playing against the University of Miami when they were the national champions that year, and they had the Heisman Trophy winner, Gino Torretta. And I had probably the best game that I ever played in my life. And I remember getting up at the 50-yard line and shaking his hand. And we walked away. And I remember this profoundly vaporous, empty feeling that I had after that moment. I can't even, it was a kind of emptiness that shook me for about 2.5 years. You know, I said, is this what life is for? If this is what I've been building my whole life for, and it just feels empty. And it scared the heck out of me. And I couldn't shake it. But I had no idea what to do with it. Fast forward a little ways forward, I ended up having a career-ending injury. I broke my pelvis and sort of began to think even more about, well, what's my life been about and what's it for? And then in 1991, I was 21 years old, or just about 21 years old, on New Year's Day. This was not planned in any way. It was not like I woke up on January 1st with a New Year's resolution, but I woke up and I will say I had some a little bit of a headache from things that I was doing the night before, and I was walking out of the hotel across to my car, and in the middle of the street, God just said to me, "You're mine." I mean, I don't really know. I can't explain exactly how I heard those words, but like, it was very clear. He said, "You're mine." So I was like, okay, what do I do now? And so I went home, and bizarrely, my grandma, who was not a Christian, bought me a Bible for the year, for Christmas. I have no idea why. But she must have looked at me and said, "You look like you need a Bible." And so I took the Bible, and I don't know if you've done this before, but I was like, all right, I know you're kind of associated with this thing. Could you just tell me something that I need to hear? So open it up, goes right to Romans chapter 12. And I'm thinking, right, I have no experience with the Bible. So I'm like, what do Romans have to do with God? Why are they in the Bible? But I kept reading on, and I got to the second verse of Romans 12. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may know the will of God. And it was like a shaft of light that gave me immediate access to understanding the reason why my life was so empty. So I knew that the vapor that I was feeling was because I was conformed to this pattern of this world. And then I knew that somehow to discern God's will, I needed to know the Bible. That's what I took away from that. And so my life since then, since January 1st, has been trying to live out that verse, trying to understand what God's will is, not just for me, but for all of us. And the bifocal focus of, on the one hand, trying to discern what are the ways that we are being conformed to the world, but then also what are the ways in which the scriptures are helping us to understand what God's will is. And so that's carried me to varying places and stages of life all over the world. Immediately after that, I finished football and naturally moved to Chile, South America, as a missionary, doing evangelism and discipleship with college students in what was previously a dictator, a country that was run by a dictator had just been opened. That's where I actually met my wife. She wasn't my wife at the time that I met her. But we've been, from there, we've been campus pastors at the University of Kansas in Kansas City. We've taught at a seminary in Costa Rica for several years. We did missions work in St. Andrews, Scotland, where I also did my PhD. And then naturally, when you go from Chile to Costa Rica to St. Andrews, you come to Longview. And so we ended up in Longview. So here we are. And so yeah, I want to just throw that question out. What is the will of God? What is the will of God? And as a New Testament professor, maybe a similar question would be, what's the message of the New Testament? If I had to take those 27 books and kind of distill out what is it that these very different biographies and letters and a book about the kind of history of the early church, and then whatever the book of Revelation is, what are these books trying to do? What are they trying to form in us? How are they trying to shape us? And so partly because of my background, but also because of my job and what I do at LeTourneau, I'm always trying to help people see the forest for the trees, or help people try to understand how things fit together. I think so often we lose the forest for the trees. We get so bogged down into smaller details that we don't understand how they all fit together. And so as I've been sort of thinking about this, and it started in a class I was teaching on Paul. It started with how would you summarize Paul in one word? But started realizing that actually it gets bigger. It fits this idea that I've come up with. This kind of fits all the New Testament. So here's what I want to say. I want to say that we can actually express what the will of God is in one word, or we could summarize, or capture, maybe is a better word, capture the central message of the New Testament in one word. And the catch, of course, is that this word is a Greek word. Okay, so it's kind of cheating in one way, because, in particular, because this one Greek word doesn't have just one meaning. So I am kind of cheating. But this word that shows up in Greek, if it were translated into English, would need a number of words to represent it, to explain kind of what it means. And if you've peeked at the outline, you know what this one word is. Okay, it's the word Koinonia, and I put it out here in Greek just in case you wanted to get a tattoo at the end, because it has led, as I've kind of shared this and taught this in other contexts, it has led to a few people getting tattoos. I'm just warning you. So if you're looking for a Christmas gift, there you go. And there's lots of different, just as there's as many different English fonts out there, this is my favorite Greek font. So there you go. It's perfect for a tattoo. So if we were to look at the word koinonia, it can actually be, depending upon the context, it can be translated in all these varying ways that I have here. Fellowship, that's probably the most common way that we know. If anybody has heard the word koinonia before, I know that word. That's fellowship, and that's certainly one way that it's translated. It's also translated as partnership. So, for example, if there's a business partnership, sometimes that can be the word could be koinonia. The word can also mean contribution. So if there was thankfully whoever sponsored this lunch today, thank you. But if there was like a little basket over there, and you were putting your $5 in, or 10, or however many you put in for the meal, that would be called a koinonia. So you'd be making your contribution. Koinonia sometimes is sharing. So sharing either an experience or sharing a resource. Sometimes the word koinonia is used to talk about generosity, being generous with your resources, and then sometimes it can be translated as participation. So here's my argument. Here's the point I want to make. So when we step back and we think about the gospel, the good news about who Jesus is, that's really important, but also what Jesus has accomplished, not just in his death, but also in his life, his life of faithfulness and faithful obedience, in his resurrection, and then also his ascension, his being at the right hand of the Father. When we think about that gospel, what's it ultimately about? And I would argue that it's ultimately about koinonia, in the full sense of that word, koinonia. Koinonia is the end goal of the gospel. To be provocative here, forgiveness of sins is not the end goal.
That's right.
Right? That's a means to an end. What's the end? Fellowship with God. Okay? And not just fellowship with God. Fellowship with God and his people. And not just fellowship with God and his people, participating with God in what God is doing in this world. And not just that, but taking our gifts, the things that God has given us, and bringing those to the people and to the mission of God, and joining in what God is doing in the world. That is the ultimate end and goal. So koinonia is the end, but it's also the means to the end. In other words, it's how we get to the goal. How do we accomplish what it is that God wants? We accomplish it by koinonia. And so I want to try to show you how this works with these 4 bullets here. As ways of just kind of unpacking both the word koinonia, but also how it gets worked out in the New Testament. So I'm kind of giving a 30,000-foot look down at this pattern that we see in the New Testament about what God is up to and what Jesus has accomplished. So the first is this. Through the life, so this is what the New Testament claims in lots of different ways, in different places. I give some examples in the handout. It's not an exhaustive examples, but through the life, the death, the resurrection, and the ascension of Jesus Christ, we have been reconciled, right? It means that we were enemies and we've been brought back together. We've been reconciled and united to the life of God. You know, this is the most common way that Paul talks about salvation, as union, being united to God. So, but people like John in his gospel, he uses a little bit different language for that. He even says that salvation is, it's a strange language, sharing, participating in God's life. God has a life. So you're reading the book, you're reading the Delighting in the Trinity, and that's what the whole book, Delighting in the Trinity, is about. It's like God has a life. God has a life of love between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And that life, that eternal life of love, we are being called into when we are saved. And we get a little glimpse of this life in Jesus' own prayer in John 17. It's a great prayer. You know, prayer is really interesting because you learn what people long for, desire, what they hope for by what they pray. And in John 17, we get a window into Jesus' prayer, Jesus' longings. What is it that Jesus wants? What is it that he hopes for? What's Jesus see his mission as? It's not always the first place we go to think about what Jesus' mission is, but it's, I think it's important to look at this prayer. So at the very end of the prayer, he says, this is the last 3 verses, Father. So already we have a dialogue going on here. Jesus talking to the Father. Father, I desire that they also whom you've given me may be with me where I am. Now, we don't have time to go into this, but the where I am is actually goes all the way back to John 1, at the Father's side. It's a relational explanation. He's not talking about geography. He's talking about relationally, right? So where am I? I'm in the bosom of the Father. So he says, I desire, so these expressions of desire, that they whom you've given me may be with me where I am, to see my glory that you've given me. Well, what's the glory that Jesus has been given? And the answer is in this little because phrase. It's in Greek. It's called an epexegetical hati. It's the clause that comes after is explaining what glory. What is Jesus' glory? You loved me before the foundation of the world. That's Jesus' glory. That from before there was even time, Jesus was the beloved. He was loved. And Jesus says, I want them to know that. That's my mission, is that they know that love. So he says that more explicitly. In verse 26, I made known to them your name, and I will continue to make it known. And then here comes the purpose clause. Why is he making known the Father's name? So that, and this is so strange the way he says this, the love with which you have loved me. So the love Father, that you have given to me, says, might be in them, and if that weren't enough, and I in them. All of that is koinonia, fellowship, partnership, communion. And that's what Jesus has come to do. That's the ground of his mission. From Jesus' words himself, he's like, that's what I came to do. So that they might know the love that I have known from eternity, and I might be in them, and they might be in me. And I'm, of course, in the Father. So you get this interpenetrating fellowship. All of that can be described by the word koinonia. Okay? Point 2. Don't worry, we'll get out of here in time. When we are connected, so if through Jesus we're reconciled and connected to this life of God, when we're connected to this life of God, the Spirit is doing something in our lives. And in particular, the Spirit is working to transform us, or to use Paul's words in Romans 8:28, conform us to Jesus. Jesus is characterized in the New Testament as the faithful one. I know we like to think of Jesus as God, and that's a good thing. But sometimes we don't always think about Jesus in his faithful humanity. And one of the things that we need from Jesus is not just his godness, but his faithful humanityness, if that were a word. What we need from Jesus is his fidelity, his faithfulness. Jesus being the object of our faith only works because Jesus was the faithful one. And what the Spirit is doing is shaping us to be like Jesus. Earlier in Jesus' prayer in John 17, he says, as you have sent me into the world, Father, so I am sending them. How did Jesus get sent into the world? As the beloved one. How are we being sent into the world? As beloved ones. And one of the ways that Jesus teaches us that we love is by hearing God's word and putting it into practice. Obedience. So when we're connected to God's life, we're being shaped to participate in Jesus' own faithfulness. Jesus, and all of that language of participating, is the word to describe that is koinonia. Well, here's the part that we like in some ways, but not in others. Point 3, when we partner with God in what he's doing in the world, so it's Like, you get to be a part of it, and you get to be a part of it. But here's the thing. When we're joined to God's life, we're joined to the life of other people too. We're joined to the life of the body of Christ. And we're called to partner with others in what God is up to in the world. Now, this is interesting because, if you read the book of Acts, this would be a fun little project for you. Read the book of Acts and just follow what it is that the Spirit is doing in Acts. And one of the things you'll notice is that the Spirit is having to push people to go be with people that they don't want to be with. Seriously, follow it. It follows out from chapter 1 all the way to the end of the book. Oh, you don't want to be with those Samaritans? You think that the Samaritans are outside of God's love? Well, I want you to go be with the Samaritans. Let's go. Or Cornelius, a Roman soldier, is too far outside of God's zone. Peter, 3 times I'm going to say this to you. Go and talk to Cornelius and hang out with him. And it isn't just go tell him. It's like, go be with him. Go love him. Go hang out with him, right? And there's just constantly this pattern in the book of Acts where the Spirit is moving people, the people of God. They think they understand who they are, but yet God's like, you don't understand yet, and you need to go be with some other people that aren't like you and that you don't think belong, and you need to go hang out with them too. And together we're going to build this project that I'm about. So anyways, that'd be a fun Advent Christmas reading. And then finally, so we get joined to Jesus. We get conformed to Jesus. We participate in Jesus' faithfulness. We get to join with others who are doing that. And then ultimately, we learn that God gives us, all of us, each of us, particular gifts. Some of those are what we might call spiritual gifts that we find like in 1 Corinthians 12 or 1 Peter 4. But others of them are just gifts and capabilities and capacities that are maybe more natural or inherited or something we learned through our background or our education. But all of those gifts are to be received as gifts and then taken to this koinonia, this life that we have with one another and with God, and shared for the specific purpose of joining God in what He's doing in this world. And that, I would argue, is the whole point of the New Testament. That wherever you scratch, whatever you're reading in the New Testament, it's trying to participate in this bigger story. It's trying to help us see how we are a part of what God is doing in the world, and that we have a part. Some texts are way more explicit, right? So Ephesians chapters 4-6, it's super clear. But others are maybe just whispering that in some way. But they're all trying to help us. So if I were to put the 13 books of the New Testament in a hat. The 27 books. I was thinking 13 books of Paul. 27 books of the New Testament in a hat. And, I say, pick one out just randomly and say, and then I have to say, okay, show me how that book connects with this idea of koinonia. I'd love to do that. I'm not going to. Uh, but it works with every single book. And the most readily available one would be Philippians, right? I left, you have verses there. I'm not going to go through it all, but in my class on Paul, I begin the semester by asking the question, why does Paul write letters? Because he actually expresses in different places that he doesn't prefer writing letters. Like, this is not his primary mode. He would rather be in person. And he's not writing letters because he was like one day like, I really want to be an author. And I would just love to write some letters. And I'm going to call them funny names like Philippians, No, he's writing when Koinonia is threatened. That's why he writes. And he can't be there to address it personally. So in his absence, he writes letters to fix problems of Koinonia. And this is clearly the case in Philippians, where you have, and I know this is hard to imagine, but where you have people who are in ministry who are using ministry for their own selfish ambitions. People in ministry who are using ministry to build up their own reputations and status amongst others. People who are fighting in ministry because they are jealous of somebody else's reputation. I mean, I'm glad it doesn't happen today, but it happened in the first century. And so Paul is writing to the Philippians because that is threatening the very nature of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And so he's trying to address that in all kinds of ways. But I just want to draw attention and it's on your handout, to the opening verses. Paul he always sets up his readers in the opening. Don't let the thanksgiving and the prayer fool you. He is trying to get you. When you listen to a prayer and a thanksgiving, always ask, what is he thankful for? And what is he praying for? And that is like breadcrumbs that are helping you get to the main point that he wants to make in his letter. So in verse 3, he says, I thank my God in all my remembrance of you, always in every prayer of mine for you, all making my prayer with joy. I think we've established that he's praying because of your Koinonia, partnership, in the gospel from the first day until now. So he's sort of like, I'm grateful for that you're participating in this gospel ministry. But I'm sure of this, that he who began a good work in you, what's the work? The Koinonia, the partnership in the gospel, and that you'll bring it to the day of completion. It's right for me to feel this way about you because I hold you in my heart, for you are all partakers. This is a synonym of the word koinonia. Partakers with me of grace. So he's going to write, what he has in view is partnership, but then when you read the rest of the letter, you realize, oh, it's not happening, right? The first exhortation in 127 is, let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel. Why does he have to say that? Because it's not. Because chapter 2, he's like, you guys are being selfish. You have selfish ambition. You have rivalries. You're using your ministry positions to build yourself up instead of following Jesus. And so on and so forth. And I could kind of unpack this more and more, but it's just one example of like, this is why we have, for example, Paul's letters. Koinonia is being threatened. So I want to end with the so what. So what? if I'm right that the message of the New Testament is about koinonia and all of its fullness, if I'm right that what God's will is, more than anything else, what God is doing in this world is joining us to his life, and he's loving the world by conforming us to his son Jesus, and that's how he loves the world, so what? Well, I think the first, maybe simple point is that that's what you've been called to. You're called to koinonia. That's the ultimate reason why we exist. To know God and to know our place in what God is doing in this world. To know how we fit with what God is up to in this world. There's nothing greater in life. As a parent of 4 kids, there is nothing more important that I want my kids to know and experience than knowing God's goodness and knowing how they fit into what God is doing in this world. But secondly, and this point can often get missed, is that the Bible, and not just the New Testament, the whole Bible is for koinonia formation. So when we read the Bible, we have to think about reading it as God, through these texts, helping us understand what he's up to, what he's doing in us, in me, in you, through me, in front of you, what he's doing through us, and then how we can join him in what he's doing. And you'd be surprised how often the Bible is not read with that lens. Sometimes it's just like, I want to know facts about I want to know stuff. But the bar is a lot higher. God is calling us not just to know stuff, to know the right stuff even, but to join in the realities that stuff is pointing to, and to join in what God is up to. And if that's the case, and if our foundational work of Christians is to become people who participate in God's life and in what God is up to in the world, then our primary duty is to pay attention to God. This is a really challenging thing in our world. I talk with my students a ton. In fact, in my Revelation class, I was looking for my phone. I left it over there. I talk with my students about, we do in some of my classes, we do an audit on our phone, our usage of the phone. Like what's the first thing you do in the morning? What are the things that you're paying attention to throughout the day? What are the things that have your attention throughout the day? So they do, we make them look at the phones keep logs of what you're looking at. So we make them take a log and fill that out, and then we ask the question, are the things you're paying attention to, do they align with koinonia? Are they helping you know God, know your place in what God is up to, participate in God's mission, contribute to the life of the people of God? And it's not, we don't do this to kind of like make people feel bad. It's just that when Paul said we're being conformed to the world, every generation has a very unique way that we're being conformed. We live, and this is not just them, by the way, this is us. We live in a world now where we are being trained by our phones to pay attention to lots of things. You know that the people that design these apps, most of them are designed by people who studied psychology of addiction. That's part of the team that makes up these things. And they're trying to get us to think about things. And so I think if the Bible is pointing us to koinonia, then that means that we need to be paying attention to what it is that God is up to and what God's doing in us and through us. But paying attention is a really hard thing nowadays. And so that's a real challenge, which is to lead to my last point, which is everything in our world works against this. Just about everything in our world is working against koinonia. You know, there's literally an epidemic of loneliness. The Surgeon General says that, this is epidemic levels, like serious concern, just like smoking was in the 80s. Yeah, that people are lonely, we're distracted, and we're being conformed to be isolated, which is the exact opposite of koinonia. And so, if we aren't being intentional about koinonia, then we are being formed. Just not in the way that we want to be. Or maybe a better word is we're being deformed. And so that is, I think, my ultimate challenge to myself, but also as we attend to the kind of overarching message of the Bible, is, are we being intentional about participating in God's life and mission for the world? If we aren't, then we're joining in something else. So I want to leave you with a benediction, which is different than a prayer. It's just a word of sending. And it's a Trinity. It's found in 2 Corinthians 3:14. Paul says, "May the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ and the love of the Father and the fellowship," koinonia in Greek, "of the Spirit," and I would translate this actually more like, "and the fellowship that's produced by the Spirit," may that be with you all. That's my prayer for you and my blessing to you as we go, and thank you for this opportunity. Yeah.
We got time for questions. Anybody want some questions?
No hard ones.
Anybody?
I think you said this, but nobody in your family had a legacy of being Christian?
Not that I know of. Certainly not in my immediate family, certainly not in my grandparents. I read my great-grandma's biography. It didn't seem to be featured there. I'm sure somewhere back there.
But the one that gave you the Bible, just that was.
Yeah, she's just, I think she's just like, man, this guy looks like he needs help. Yeah.
Anybody else? Here, Ron. Well, thanks for that.
Okay. How can churches best live this out?
Easy question, Ron.
Man, that's a great. Well, I will say, I mean, I've been a pastor, so I founded a church, One Hope Presbyterian, and was a pastor for 10 years. So I say this as knowing that this is a really hard thing. And I certainly don't say it as one who feels like we accomplished it. But you may know what I mean by this, but like there's the business of the church, and then there's what the New Testament is calling us to. And they're not always the same thing, right? So I think it really depends upon where where you're at. If you're in a church that has a long sort of history and all of that, that's a really hard. I would say you start small. You start in a small group maybe, and just say, hey, we're going to try and figure out how to live this out more intentionally. I think if you're a pastor, you have a different capability of kind of influencing and shaping. But I do think at the core, you start with focusing on people, maybe more than programs. And not to say that programs are bad. I don't mean that at all. And programs can definitely serve people. But I've been in contexts where the maintaining of a program sort of overrides the kind of focusing on people. But I think it maybe just goes back to, I'm thinking of Ephesians chapter 4, what would it look like to walk into your churches to believe that everyone that's here has been gifted and has some way of contributing? And what would it mean to get serious about leveraging that and trying to discover that and trying to help them discover that, and then then to respond, not, well, I have a strategic plan, but like to say, oh, this is the people God has. These are the gifts that we have. This is how we sense God kind of moving us to serve this community in this particular way. So it's like paying attention to who it is that God has in your midst is one way. I mean, there's a gazillion other probably, but yeah, it's really hard.
Anybody else? All right, that was great, Dr.
Thank you. No, appreciate it.
He's going to have to come back, isn't he? And the rest of us, we're becoming Greek scholars and Hebrew scholars. Yeah. Well, I never considered it till he said that might be a good one for a tattoo. So, and let me just wrap it up with this: he said there's an epidemic of loneliness, and I tell you, that's where pastors are. So I want to encourage y'all, love on your pastors. These guys, part of Satan's strategy is to keep them isolated because they've been burned. And so, Satan just whispers to them, I can't say this to this person or that person. I mean, think about it. They have to put up with us. That ought to make us pray for them. But love them. Yes.
I think this is also particularly one of the hardest times of the year for pastors. So, in particular, praying for pastors in this time, and it's already kind of like weariness and all kinds of crazy dynamics that happen this time. But there's a kind of bizarre pressure on pastors to make this a meaningful season for everyone, and I think that's makes it really hard too. So,
all right, Ryan, come pray us out of here. God bless y'all.
Father in heaven, thank you for all these beautiful souls in this room and that are online, that's how you see us. It is through the lens of your beloved Son, and we're grateful for that. Thank you so much for Kelly's testimony about how you worked in his life, and help us to realize you desire to work in everyone's life. Help people to say yes to Jesus. Amen.